Hi everyone, I'm Cary Ginell. I'll be your instructor for the Beatles Part 2. And if you've been waiting a long time for this, I'm hoping that it'll be worth the wait. I guess it was in the spring when we presented Part 1, but it gives you a chance to really kind of ruminate over what you've learned so far. The Beatles learning how to not only write their own material after spending time learning their craft in Germany, but also learning how to use the tools in the recording studio, since that's really the name of the class is the Beatles in the studio. Now we divided the class up into two sections for a reason. The first one ended with Revolver, which was really the most astounding product that they had produced up to that point. But at the end of the recording of that session, they decided to dispense with their live touring. And that really marked the beginning of part two of the Beatles' recording career. So that's where we start off with week 5 of our 8-week course, the end of 1966 and the beginning of 1967. And this is at a time when Paul McCartney was really starting to take over the reins of the Beatles as the primary creative force. And the first thing that he wanted to do resulted in the most astounding album, the most impressive trailblazing album in rock and roll history, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So we'll be talking about the genesis of that album and its production in detail, song by song, handling every song in the first of the four classes. The second one focuses on Magical Mystery Tour. That's where McCartney decided to get even more ambitious with his next album and coordinate it with a television production, which apparently fell flat on its face. That was the first real failure that the Beatles had in their careers. So much so that it was never really issued on an LP in England, only on 45 RPM extended play records. As they gather themselves, they're now moving into the psychedelic era in 1968, and they decide to go back to basics and not fool around with all the overdubbing and backwards tapes and oddball instrumentation that they'd been doing. They had basically been a rock and roll band when they started out, and that's where the White Album comes in. But the White Album also showed the group starting to fracture, and the White Album was really four solo albums rolled into one. There were very few tracks, if any, on the White Album where all four Beatles participated. After that, they produced Let It Be, which was an album that was associated with the documentary of them doing the album. The documentary never actually took place. The only film that was exhibited dealing with the Let It Be sessions was the famous rooftop session. And then finally, in the last week, we'll talk about pretty much the most highly praised technically and sonically of their albums, and that's Abbey Road. And what a way to go out! And we'll of course be talking about some of the singles and the other interesting things that came along in the meantime. In the interim between those major works, such as the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, the arrival of Yoko Ono, etc. Lots to discuss, lots to take apart and dissect. We'll be hearing all of it. So I hope you'll join me on our own little magical mystery tour. Hop in your yellow submarine and join me.